one of the barricades that people erect basically is bullshit that they believe about their own tastes. And the guy that doesn't like sweet wines consumes sweetness in every other form, obviously. He probably puts 3 packets of sugar into his iced tea. He'll drink a Coke, which is 116 grams per liter of residual sugar, and the average Riesling Cabinet is 1/3 of that. But when he tastes the Riesling, he'll say he doesn't like it because it's sweet. So it's true in wine as it is in many things. A little knowledge is a dangerous thing. And people look for kind of a foothold. Wine is so bewildering, you know, because there's so many of them and they change every year. And so people look for a foothold and they try to establish something they can depend on, an opinion they can depend on, usually. And once having arrived at that opinion, now they need to defend it, because
Right.
if they have to abandon that opinion, then they're just like, you know, swimming in ignorance again. And that's really destabilizing for a lot of people. So they'll cling to an opinion which doesn't necessarily correspond with the sensual evidence that they're experiencing, but they have got to cling to that opinion, because otherwise they feel like that they don't know where they are. They feel lost.
Yeah.
So you had asked me once in a email exchange, you know, how we can help these folks along. And you know, obviously the best possible answer to that question is people who want to learn about wine should have a wine mentor, someone like you. And you know, somebody who will kind of patiently and kindly guide them along. Wine people, I think, in general, are very humane and generous in that respect. I mean, if we have the time, there's no shortage of the time that we will explain to help someone come along and share this love that we feel.
Yeah.
And I'm sure that you would agree with that.
Yes, of course. There's always clues, little crumbs that I can pick up, and based on what they tell me that they do like or that they've had. I like this Pinot Noir that I had. Okay, now I have an idea of this style of wine, and I can give them something else. So you give them the Pinot so they can trust you, because you can't just take them totally, unless of course you tell them that Riesling is Chardonnay, in which case they'll really like you right away. But usually you have to lube them up a little bit slower than that. especially if you want to stay friends. So
that's quite true. Yeah, that's quite true. And you know, I think wine people we're very generous in that respect with our time and with sharing our knowledge. And also we want to admit more people into the fold. You know, in some ways kind of lonely being a wine freak. There's not all that many of us. And so if we can bring someone else into this lovely fraternity in the French sense of fraternité, brotherhood or sisterhood of wine loving, that's really great.
Yeah.
You know, that's really great. Something else I think that would be useful for people is one really well-written wine book. Not mine. Mine are not for beginners.
Yeah.
You know, I think if you really want to have one single book that's going to encapsulate this whole complicated, unruly world of wine, it would have to be the World Atlas of Wine. You know, originally written by Hugh Johnson and now has been updated by Johnson and Jancis Robinson. First, it's comprehensive. Second, it's charmingly and elegantly written. Third, it's beautiful.
Yes.
And fourth, it contextualizes all of the, you know, most important wines of the world and many of the least important. So, you know, having a book is a very useful thing if you don't have a mentor or a friend. I mean, when I started, the first edition of the Johnson Atlas was available to me. The Michael Broadbent tasting book was available to me. The Alexis Lachine Encyclopedia of Wine was available to me. You know, all of those things, and they were all at my side as I was tasting and drinking wine. And, they sort of guided me. They gave me an itinerary, if you will, as I went off exploring. Um, and that's tremendously important. And if you've got Karen McNeil's book, which is wonderful. Oz Clarke is a very entertaining writer. But I think it's a very good idea for someone just interested enough to want to learn more about wine, but reaching that point where it's all just kind of washing over me. I can't make sense of it. It's too complicated.
And what's wonderful too about a book like that, because I have that book, of course, is when you start out and you're reading and comprehending and trying to wrap your head around it for the first time, how daunting and overwhelming it is. And then after a while, it becomes a reference that you go back to it. And suddenly you have so much more comprehension and understanding. And then it starts to become this familiar old friend that you could know better, but it's not like you don't know them at all. So at least we've met before.
Yeah. Tell me if you agree with this, because I kind of think you will, based on something you said earlier. If I were trying to teach someone about wine, or if I were teaching, I don't know, like a class or something at a community college or what have you, adult education, I would basically say, look, to learn about wine, instead of tasting 25 different wines and trying to make sense of that, because it's going to be incoherent, how about tasting the same kind of wine 25 times?
The same grape variety?
Yep, same grape variety. So you establish your theme. Let's say, I don't know, your theme is Syrah. So now you're going to taste Syrah from all the places that it comes. And we know them all. And for a few weeks, maybe a month, Syrah is the only red wine you drink. And man, you are going to really grok Syrah. You are really going to understand it. And because you're going to see how it varies from one place to another, plus how it doesn't vary. You'll see the things that are different about the different ones, but the things that are the same about all of them. And you will really get Syrah. So now a month has gone by and you're thinking, I'd like to try something else. And now you try, I don't know, Pinot Noir. And the first thing that happens, the first mouthful of Pinot Noir, you're like, oh my goodness, this is different. And you will be able to identify all the ways that it's different from Pinot Noir or from Syrah, because you know Syrah, it's in your bloodstream. So the first thing you'll notice is, wow, the color is lighter. Oh, there's also no tannin. The texture is kind of smoother. It doesn't have those smoky flavors. It's got this other panoply of flavors. Wow. So the knowledge of one variety gives you the ability to jump forward and contrast it with the next variety. And if you do that one variety at a time, in a year, you will have only tasted, 12 reds, 12 grape varieties in red and 12 grape varieties in whites. And you will feel like you're falling behind all of your colleagues who are drinking all these different wines. But trust me,
I'm gonna do this, Terry.
Thousands more than they do.
I have given so many tastings and set people up with flights of wine, and I love doing the same grape variety side by side and instructing or suggesting that people taste things, open them all. I know you don't want to open all 3 of the bottles, but the thing is, when a person gets a bottle of wine, if they like wine and they open it up, unless there's something significantly wrong with it, it's just another bottle of wine. The sake of comparison is so critical to expanding what they understand and know about it. And so I've done that quite a bit, but never that sort of a commitment over a month phase. And I think that would be so wonderful, because when you're out showing wine and teaching people and offering, and in sales as well, it's necessary to get a lot of things in your mouth, but it's really not actually, because especially now we learn to sell without sampling, which is so sad kind of, but for my own personal, edification, I think that type of commitment for a very short period of time, my career's a little shorter than yours. I've been at this only 10 years, but how many months are in 10 years? That's a lot of that's a lot of time to have been
Mhm.
at work at this, and yet there's no one variety. I prefer certain varieties, but I don't necessarily have that sort of a, what's the word, immersion. So
Right, right. Yeah, I think if you're going to follow that course of study, when you're ready to move on to the next variety because you're getting bored. You're sort of
like a
thinking,
tracing.
yeah, let's do something else. You know, I mean, you could start somebody with, I don't know, Albarino, let's say.
Yeah.
And after a couple of, there's not that many Albarinos in the world. So after a week or two of Albarino, you could say, okay, let's move to something similar to Albarino, Muscadet, or something along those lines. So now you're in the genre of crisp dry whites that are on the flinty side, that don't have a lot of fruit per se. But the next thing that you do after you've left Albarino and Muscadet is you go to something fruity.
Mm.
And then you have, ooh, that's a
Like
wow
contrast
experience with
between
fruit.
Pinot and Syrah.
Yeah, exactly. So that would be, again, I mean, if I were a wine instructor in a parallel and deranged universe, that's probably how I would go about it. And I think that somebody who wants to learn about wine would probably find that approach reassuring, unless they were nervous because their friends were drinking a wider variety of wines than they themselves were. And all I could say to that person is, yeah, your friends they're drinking like 20 zillion white wines from Italy from all these different varieties and places. Um, but trust me, they don't know as much as you do. They have more information. They have a wider amount of information bots than you do. But a lot of it is um, not registering deeply. It's just kind of running off. It's like when the soil is dry and you have a thunderstorm. Um, the water just runs off. You need to have a soaking rain before the soil will begin to absorb it. We have a drought happening right now in New England. Um, And it's, I think, the same with wine knowledge. To the extent that you can construct a sort of an instructional matrix where people can absorb knowledge and understanding, as opposed to simply being exposed to information.
Right. There's no
It's going to
penetration.
be,
But I would think, even though a year and you've tasted 12 red and 12 white grape varieties, I think even after the 2 months of tasting the Syrah and then going to the Pinot, after just the 2 months, you would at least have an understanding of what there is to learn.
yeah,
So the point of being knowing more and having a deeper understanding is the gateway to really going somewhere else with it.
yeah. Hey,
And
wine is the gateway drug to bliss.